Today's conversation is a bit of a mixed bag, but I think you're going to love it. I interview Jonathon Aslay, a well-known author in the dating and relationship space, who's also been a relationship coach, particularly for those in their midlife. And we not only have a deep conversation about his own dark night of the soul and how his struggles with his relationship with himself and having self-love led to his new purpose in life. And it's a very amazing return to grace kind of a story. So if you've ever been in a situation or are in one and where you feel a little down out in life, how your pain and your sorrow may be the very thing that is going to be your next biggest opportunity. And then we also get into self-love and relationships in modern times, and why it can seem so difficult to find and keep and hold a quality relationship in a world that no longer values marriage as much as it used to. And even when you are, people aren't really doing their work in relationships, and you end up having fighting and distance and separation, and it leads to a lot of heartbreak. What is the solution? Well, we discuss this today and more in today's episode. I'm your host, Eric Copeland, and welcome to another episode of The Music of Life. I'll see you inside. Mr. Jonathon Aslay, welcome, brother.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Very well. I appreciate you coming on the podcast with me. Our mutual friend, Dr. Ray Doctor, connected us, and I think when we spoke on the phone, I realized pretty quickly, like, me and this guy have a lot in common, and so I was pretty stoked to get you on and dig into you a little bit. So welcome.
Well, I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Well, just to give my audience a little bit of introduction to you, I was looking at your some of the cool stuff on your bio. So impressively, you have a #1 like new release, a book, or it ranked as a new release as #1. What the heck is self-love anyway? So you got a book.
Yeah,
is that what I see on the shelf right there?
Yeah.
Nice. And you call yourself the America's leading midlife dating and relationship coach and defender and protector of women's hearts around the world. I love that.
Well, I probably that's self-proclaimed leading, but I certainly the fact that I'm unique in that I specialize in the demographic, particularly those in midlife, which I say is after baby making years, before retirement, and a big percentage of that group is divorced. So I kind of niched in that area because I think divorce brings a whole set of different circumstances than those are in their baby making years.
Yeah, it's a great point. And and I want to get, we talked, I'm certainly going to get into a little bit your backstory, which I found incredibly interesting as to how you got involved in all this and how you developed so much empathy for, the position people find themselves in life when they have big setbacks or life changes or you're in midlife. Yeah. One of the things, I just turned 44 3 days ago. And
happy birthday, belated.
Yeah. And so, as I'm entering that midlife realm, it is interesting that socially and culturally that there's very little advice out there in terms of all the advice in life is front loaded. When you're a kid, you're being raised, and the older you get, it gets less and less. And you're like, you figure it out. You're on your own. And the truth is we still desire love. We still desire connection. We still desire those things. And I think it's really cool that there's people like you out there that have that empathy and understanding for that and are willing to help people navigate that process and still keep things fresh and alive and interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting. Now, you said I have empathy. There are times I'm like, I can be sometimes a lot of tough love on my, particularly on my YouTube channel. And I share this because, every once in a while, it takes a 2x4 to shift, a person's perspective. And so sometimes I'm not as empathetic as I probably should be. I'm just owning that piece right now because every once in a while I come across as a 2x4, at least to my audience. So,
yeah, well, I mean, I would say to that is that empathy doesn't necessarily mean soft. Empathy is the part of you that makes them trust you. so that when you do whip out the 2x4, they know it's coming from a place of love and not abuse. It's actually love.
You know what? Thank you for that reframe. I'm actually now going to use that.
Yeah. You're welcome. So we'll probably pepper in a little what you do as we go, but I got to dig into this backstory, man, because it was
okay.
When I was on the phone with you and we were talking about it, like you really went through a hero's journey that led you to where you are now. And on my channel, I'm really all about wanting people to have that. I really empathize with the journey itself, and that life, there's two sides to it. There's accountability, and then there's also the fact that we know we could be or do better, and also to empathize with the pain when we can't really quite see what that is, and learning how to dance between those two levels of consciousness requires wisdom. And so I like to seek and gather wisdom from people that have kind of figured those things out for themselves in some area of life, so that we can kind of pay that forward to others. And with you were telling me that, when you were around the age of 40, that you went through this big shift, and that led you to do what you are now. And it was a really dark night of the soul. And I want you to share that story. I'd love for you to tell, share with my audience, like what that dark night of the soul was for you.
Sure. So, and thank you for this opportunity, because as I reflect upon it, I know most everybody has a hero's journey, if you will, and each person's hero's journey is unique. And for some, it can be incredibly easy, and for some of them, it can be incredibly hard. I will say mine is kind of in the middle. I don't believe I've experienced some real trauma. And I mean it typically, usually in the sense of physical abuse type of trauma. I really want to give a lot of, or want to emphasize the empathy there in relationship to mine. So since you brought it up, so much like I'm the tail end baby boomer right before Gen X. And I was raised with, go to college, get a job, meet a girl, get married, buy a house, start a family. And so I was following that programming. That's literally the script that I was raised with. And so I got a job in the insurance industry, of all things. I was in insurance sales. And through that experience, I met a woman who happened to be in the town I lived in, and we had some mutual friends and that sort of thing. And we got married, bought a house, and started a family. And two things were happening during that period of time. I wasn't a very conscious husband, and I was rather hyper-focused on financial success. And during this period of time, because I wasn't a good husband, my now ex-wife asked to end the marriage. And literally within the same month, the company I worked for, and I'd worked my way up to a high-end corporate paying job. We're talking very high-end corporate pay. The company laid me off. And so I'm right in the middle of going through divorce. I get laid off in my professional capacity, and right at around the same time, close to that same time, was the market crash in the late 2000s, 2008. So I'm going through a divorce. My professional identity literally was ripped out from underneath me, and my whatever financial status I had at that point was wiped out, mostly wiped out. And I was in the pit of despair. I mean, I literally, for a period of time, I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up. And I had 2 small children at this time. And during this period of time, I found myself doing a lot of drugs to self-medicate. I was drinking. I wasn't working. I found myself moving back in. By the way, really quickly, Eric, at one point during this experience, I had a home worth $2.2 million in an affluent area in Los Angeles, to having to move in with my mother and father in a retirement community of all places. And, I barely have little or no money left. I mean, my identity was crushed. And I'm doing drugs and alcohol to get through the day. Interestingly enough, at the same time, my other drug of choice was online dating.
Interesting.
And what I mean to say is, when I say drug of choice, it was an addiction, but what it was therapy to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
I was communicating with women all across the country. I mean, that's the interesting thing about that. By the way, folks, this was before dating apps, like the Bumble and
swiping.
Hinge.
This was like plenty of fish kind of stuff,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're on your laptop, it's a little, there's a different experience because I can get into this later, but I think our current dating environment is quite a bit different now than it was 15, 16 years ago.
Definitely.
And I was communicating with women all across the country, in many cases, just talking to them, hearing their stories, sharing our experiences. It was like therapy. But for me, it was an addiction as well, because I was addicted to that connection. But through those connections, I was also actually at the same time healing through the talk therapy, if you will. Now, in all fairness, I was a train wreck during this period of time. And what was shocking is women were actually very accommodating to a man who's a train wreck. Because women have this beautiful capacity to be nurturers. Yes. And so, and by the way, I'm not actually, in many cases, I wasn't physically dating these women. It was just talking. At the same time, what was interesting that happened was a lot of women would reach out to me and say, "Hey, Jonathon, would you look at my dating profile and help me make it better? How can you help me improve it?" And all of a sudden, I would start giving some advice on dating profiles. And then a few weeks would go by and I'd get a phone call saying, "Hey, I met a really great guy. Can you give me some advice about the guy?" And Eric, I was doing this every single night for years. Unbeknownst to me, it was preparing me for my current profession, which is now a dating and relationship coach. And there's more to that story of how I actually became one, but that's kind of the base. So what was interesting was I go through this absolute dark night of the soul. I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up. I'm being, I was drugs and alcohol to get through the day. But at the same time, there was this reparenting happening through this talk therapy, if you will, that led me on the path to where I'm at today.
That's awesome. It's always interesting to me how pain can transmute into purpose. I'm curious what you think about this philosophy.
Sure.
I have a very philosophical side of me. I like to contemplate on why are things the way they are and what lessons, what beauty is there in that. I really can find these things quite beautiful. And one of the transcendent things about pain is that, first of all, my acronym for it is, I call it, for myself, I says paying attention is necessary. That's what pain means to me, right?
Paying attention is necessary. Yeah, that's a good one.
Like it's not there for no reason. It's a signal. It's a whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, all that. But the invitation in pain is it's a message that something is not being allowed or understood or loved, and which is going to come back to the self. And here you are in this situation where you had this egoic attachment to this identity of being Mr. Successful with my multi-million-dollar home. I did the right things. I got the woman. I checked all the boxes. How come my life is falling apart? And if these things don't lead to happiness, then I don't know what happiness is, I guess, and of course, I guess I'll just drink, And how interesting that in that despair, you started to find purpose and just, you kind of let go and started just listening to the self. Well, I'd love to connect with women, and you're connecting with them. And then it leads to this exposure of this quality or trait you have, where you have this aptitude for this capacity to have that empathy and valuable insight and maybe give words to it in a way that other people can't. And then, so now I want to know is like, what was that moment where you realized that these phone calls every day are like, is actually, this is a career opportunity, or like how did that purpose evolve into it actually becoming like a business for you?
You know, that's an interesting question because, on some level, they say you find your purpose on the path you didn't expect to take. So, I'm like, you were correct in saying I thought that blueprint that was passed on to me by my parents was going to be happiness. And I own that there was a huge egoic part that was going on at that point in my life. I hadn't done any real true self-reflection, any real personal development, self-help, spiritual work at that point in my life. I was driven by the ego. And when the ego got humbled, and I mean dramatically humbled.
Yeah.
There's something about having a humbling event that changes everything. And so to the respect that it led me on the path that I am now as a dating and relationship coach, it didn't happen overnight. It's kind of like, you have to kind of look at, there's all these little, what did Steve Jobs say when you connect the dots going, there's all these little dots. One in particular that stands out in this conversation is during my dating escapades, I dated an internet marketer, a very successful woman who's a multimillionaire. And I got to see her world for a little bit. And when that relationship ended, was about the time that I was still in a little bit of a pit of the despair, but about 6 months or a year later, I'm like, I could start a website, like there's this, by the way, websites in 2000, this is now 2008, 2009, doing landing pages and websites that weren't part of a big corporation, that any person could create a website.
YouTube was only a couple years old.
Yeah, YouTube was only a couple years old. So it was like, right at that time, I'm like, why not just put a website up? And I did. And the funny thing happened, 3 weeks later, I get this phone call saying, would you like to be interviewed for a radio talk show? My website was dating coach kind of thing. Yeah. And I'm like, first, how did they find me? Because back then it was so different. The SEO was different. It was so green back in 2008, 2009 period of time. And I'm like, I just got asked to do a radio show. And quite frankly, Eric, I was talking out of my ass. I mean, I had really no real expertise at this point. I was literally most of it, all my advice those early years was just intuitive perspective based on my own anecdotal experiences. But for the most part, it was just intuitive. But one radio show led to another. And then I got invited to a group of relationship coaches. They were doing because let me backtrack. I had a Facebook page that was starting to get popular. And this was right at the, beginning of Facebook. And I got invited to a relationship coach's dinner, which was like 25 of the top relationship coaches in LA. And I'm like, I got invited. And I mean, like, I wasn't making any money at doing this yet. Or barely I was making a few dollars. But then I got connected with all these people. And then they invited me to be on their summits. And then I got invited to be on this person's summit. And all of a sudden, little by little, my business began formulating. But I realized I had no expertise per se. So I began studying every book behind me, if you can see. Is just a small sampling of the relationship books I began reading. and studying and watching YouTube videos and going to workshops and seminars and trainings. I mean, in the last 15 years, I've have over 3,000 hours of personal development workshops, trainings that I've gone to and participated in. And but to some degree, I was honing my craft through this deep desire to learn more about. See, let me backtrack for a second. Very few people are ever taught what it's like to be in a relationship, how to be successful in a relationship, how to learn good communication skills. None of this stuff was taught, especially to my demographic. It's starting, or age group. It's starting to change for the much younger generation. I mean, even therapy was taboo when I was growing up, and now it's becoming more mainstream. So it really didn't happen. The catalyst was just a number of different things to get to me where I was at in those earlier years.
What do you think were some of the in making that transition? You know, you and I talked about the hero's journey theme, right? Yeah. You know, Joseph Campbell, a hero with 1,000 faces. He looked at all the, we see this theme show up in Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. It's a psychological process, that can fill, all these storylines, right? And so as part of that journey, I hear like you were where you were, you thought you're successful. You have this catalyst we call failure that sends you on a path, and you start to discover within yourself this like power to help people in a position that you empathize with. And then as you're rising out of that, you're meeting these coaches and you're coming in, starting a business. Along that way, you're going to meet you're going to have comrades and villains. And so what were some of your demons or monsters that you had to kind of slay within yourself to give yourself permission to rise from that in the direction that you did?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm embarrassed to say it now. It's funny. So my first, my first year after my divorce, I told you I'm addicted to dating. I actually had, and this is no lie, 100 first dates in 1 year. I mean, literally twice a week. Which, by the way, twice a week isn't that hard to do, believe it or not. Especially back when online dating was so green. I mean, it was rather easy. And by the way, I was 15 years younger, so I was a little more handsome then. And I never forget, I went on a date with a woman, great, really my first date, really nice woman, great first date, but something wasn't right. And then a couple days later, another woman, great date, nice woman, something wasn't right. And then a couple days later, another woman, great date, nice woman, something wasn't right. And after these 100 dates, I actually looked in the mirror and said, wait a minute, I'm the common denominator here. At first I was blaming everyone else. And again, these were, there was a deeper issue going on for me that I had to really explore. But at first I had to recognize that I was the common denominator. And in that began actual seeking help to look at my own stuff. And right about that time, the movie The Secret came out. I mean, I'd already been into Tony Robbins and some other stuff. It's funny, I had bought Tony Robbins CDs 10 years earlier off of an infomercial, back when that's how he got started, was infomercials before the internet. And then I finally cracked it open like 10 years later, started to listen. But it was more about how to improve your mindset for money. That was kind of the theme in many cases within the earlier stuff of Tony Robbins, although there was relationship stuff too. It was the recognition that I was the common denominator. And then I wanted to learn why I made the choices that I did in my life. And now I'm in, right about mid 40 at this point. So it wasn't until I began doing true introspective work and learning this thing called childhood wounds and adult traumas that affect everybody. We could have wounds as oftentimes people hear the word childhood wounds or traumas and they think of somebody that was physically abused in their childhood. I was bullied in school. It was not extensively. I was just casually bullied, but that has a traumatic effect on a small child. So sometimes the most benign thing can have major consequences as adults. And so when I learned of this, I recognized that there's something I have to do for myself to heal. So the dating coaching was really a catalyst for my own healing, because as I'm trying to help others, I'm literally helping myself in the process.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's beautiful how life can work. It just does work that way if you choose to see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You mentioned a word, introspection. And, I remember when, you're familiar with Eben Pagan and his program. So I had like double your dating all the way back in 2000, like 4, 5. Yeah. He was talking about soon there will be what we call text messaging. It was talked about in there. That's funny. Yeah. Just to date it. But, at that time, I grew up Mormon, actually. I don't know if you know that or not. I grew up Mormon, and I was very much active in that. I did the whole 2 years missionary, white shirt, name tag. And part of
I saw the South Park episode.
Yeah. You go. Your eternal salvation depends on your virginity until you're married. So it's a lot of repression of that masculine. When you feel those desires, you have to like snuff it and try to channel it some other way.
Sure.
Which is a whole nother thing. But I got this course because I knew not only that, I'd grown up in the country in Texas, and I was like, whistle at your dog, grab my 22 rifle, and pee and poop in the forest, kind of like a country. Like I drink out of streams, caught venomous snakes, like shooting guns, all that kind of stuff. That was my childhood. So coming to like California, all of a sudden I'm around girls. I like them, but don't get too close. You're Mormon. It's this whole thing, right? So when I got Eben's course, it started teaching me, the lessons that I was never getting from like the masculine, which was like, how attraction works and what's just to understand it. And it was so empowering to me to get my hand, to understand that and have it start to click. And I started to practice and rehearse these things. But I remember when I look back on it, one of the biggest things that set me on, and where I feel like, man, that's like my saving grace in life is like, been the fact that I've always been a open-minded and self-reflective person. Like I chose that path. And I remember him teaching a concept of like psychological reframing as one little technique for that, where you start to like tell yourself the story of like, I can't approach a girl because I'm too nervous and I think she'll reject me or whatever your story is. And then you start questioning it. Is that true? How do you know it to be true? Is that always true for all people? If, whatever your fear is, I'm bald. So like, okay, so all bald men are unable to get women. You'll never see a bald man with a beautiful woman. And you start to realize, oh, that's my story. It's not the truth, and that self-reflective process. Like, I'm so grateful that I found that, because it's accountability, but it also comes with grace. It's accountability, and it also it opens you up to love, And so I think that's what I'm hearing in your message is that, you had to take accountability for and become aware of the role that you played in your so-called failures, and which was coming from your story. You took ownership of that, and you also acknowledged and decided to pay attention to the fact that it felt good to help other people. And it's really cool that in just the helping other people that you discovered who you were, in that process. And I'm sure that's still an unfolding process for you even now,
it's interesting because the layers of, really personal development is much like peeling an onion, and sometimes you think you've just peeled off this big piece, but believe me, there's just more layers to keep going. And as my as my journey began unfolding, and I started to become a bit successful in my business. I became popular, and in the sense that whether it's through YouTube, well, really originally it was Facebook, and then or through social media, I should say, and then eventually through YouTube, and doing. Starting this deeper personal development work. One of the workshops I did was called the Hoffman process. And the Hoffman process is a deep dive of healing negative patterns, limiting beliefs. It goes back to your childhood. It's a 8-day, you're in a silo where you're just working on your stuff for 15, 16 hours a day. And then a few months, and part of that is healing with your mother-father stuff. That's a big part of Hoffman. And what was what I want to share next is 4 months after doing Hoffman, my mother passed away. Now, mind you, she was 88 years old. She lived a good life. There was it was her time. I mean, actually, she lived 9 years more than the average person does. So I was very grateful. But it certainly was an interesting coincidence that I got to heal with my parents before my mother passed away. And actually, my father's still alive. This is quite a bit. He's 98 years old, which is like a phenomena in and of itself. And then I began doing A Course in Miracles. And for some people, this might be a turnoff to hear this, but A Course in Miracles is an interesting way of approaching life from a personal accountability perspective, a spiritual perspective. But one of the things that was heavily discussed in the course was death. And why I'm bringing this up is there's a picture behind me of my two boys. In the summer of 2018, I'd lost my 19-year-old son to an accident.
Oh, wow.
And thank you. And why I'm bringing this up is for most people, they would think that would be an incredibly devastating experience. And to anyone who has lost a child, I absolutely can empathize with that experience. But what's interesting is it didn't take me down the path of deep suffering, partially because losing my professional identity was almost in some ways even more devastating, and losing my money. Everything that represented masculinity, my marriage, my money, and my job, like everything that represented what it meant to be a man, was so devastating. And yet I got 10 years to begin preparing myself emotionally for what is an incredibly devastating experience of losing a child. And I remember while at the funeral and I was giving his eulogy, I stopped in the middle and I turned to every one of his friends and our family and everyone, and I said, we have a choice, everyone. We can suffer right now. We can grieve through suffering, is what I said. We could grieve through suffering. I'm going to make the conscious choice, and I'm inviting everyone here to grieve with love. And what motivated me was by the Course in Miracles. The miracle is choosing love, by the way. That's the Course in Miracles. If I can condense it for everyone, the miracle is every time we choose love over fear and suffering, and when we choose to heal. And I said to everyone, I'm going to grieve with love, and I invite everyone else to do the same. So 2 months after he passed, I poured my energy into writing a book, which is right behind me, which is called What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? I completed it 9 months to the day when he passed is when it got published on Amazon. And as you shared, it was briefly a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Actually, it's still in the top. It's in the top 20,000 or 100,000, which is still a phenomenal number when you consider the multi-million books out there on Amazon. And that loss was a catalyst for me to really examine, what does it mean to love? like love at a deeper level, not, but most importantly, when we can begin to love ourselves, I believe it's a vaccination for emotional chaos. And because I believe most humans suffer on the inside from, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not likable.
Yeah.
And the process of, and I'm not saying, by the way, I wrote a book and I continually, I don't want to say fail. What would the word be? I'm continually having to revisit my own love for myself. Okay. Like I even wrote the book about it, and I am constantly peeling that layer, those onions of learning to love myself. And yet I know that this process allows an individual to really live their fullest life. And loving, by the way, really quickly, self-love isn't manicures and pedicures and working out the gym, although that's all part of self-care. Self-love is really encapsulated self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-reliance, self-determination. And self, did I say self-confidence? That's what it encapsulates. It's, and to the extent that it's self, is that we cannot take care of any other human being until we take care of ourselves. So just like when the flight attendant on an airplane says, in the case of cabin pressure change, if you're traveling with small children, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. That's what self-love is. It's putting the oxygen mask on yourself first, because then you can be in service of everyone when you fill your own cup up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's funny how, isn't it funny, Jonathan, how simple concepts like self-love, like it can't, like you really, even that is a failure in describing what it is, right? Like that's just words. So then you get people that get twisted up in the semantics of things, whatever. Self-love is an experience of, to me, I'm curious what you think about this. I was, I've had, just like you, go through things where you're like feeling a little bit separate from that part of you that feels empowered and confident, and, allowing give yourself permission to feel good. You got some excuse as to why you can't be happy. Right. And that can be a very difficult process to, it can be, it doesn't have to be, but it can be difficult to ride back at that. So I replaced the word love with allow. And it was it was an interesting experiment for me, because it implied a little bit more action, self-allowance, what am I not allowing myself to do? And I kind of realized that for me, like self-love is giving yourself permission to, whether move on that idea, to try something out, to open your mind, to be willing to be okay with maybe the issue here isn't that you aren't worthy or aren't capable, but maybe you just like don't know how to tie your shoes in that area of life. And if you just went and learned how to, and so there comes that accountability part, it helped me with that. So self-allowance, and of course you could take and then twist that word. That just makes you a narcissist, whatever. People could go down those paths. I want
to say this because there's this misconception, it comes back to, I could say putting the oxygen mask on your first is very selfish. I'm like, yeah, but it's necessary, like I can't take care of, like it's important to take care of self. And then it gets twisted with verbiage of narcissism, but it's important to take care of self first. That is, I think, the most important thing in life is you can't be a good human being to others if you don't take care of yourself first.
Yeah. Let's do a little pivot here, and it'll drill in a little bit of what you do.
Sure.
Because let's talk about this, and it really dovetails nicely with that. I tell people, look, I had to be like the recovering nice guy. I grew up I had spiritual experiences from the age of 8 where I felt a connection, I felt love. And then to me, learning to embrace my masculine energy and how to maybe really put up boundaries and say no, and these kind of things were things that I didn't feel safe doing because they just weren't cultivated in me And so it created I had to learn those things. So for me, personal growth in dating and attraction and me going, learning women was like the ultimate test of that, to step up into that. And then you find the beautiful truth that like the irony is you just learn how to be yourself, and then like everything else is kind of handled by nature. Right. And you're like, oh, I'm creating way too much work, like just show up and trust. But I've noticed from the perspective, let's say, a nice guy who maybe has or and I see this a lot with women. There is this thing that happens where we can tend to bypass our emotions and turn ourselves into a doormat. So I've noticed like how it might show up in relationships with like women. They'll feel very victimized towards they'll be so they don't realize that being in the victim consciousness makes them very attractive to what they call a narcissist, because they both actually don't feel a connection to self-love, but they have two different strategies for dealing with it. The narcissist uses control, and the victim it uses avoidance, right? So they don't feel safe standing up for themselves. So the guy that makes sense to them is the exciting one that they think is going to liberate them, but ends up controlling them, right? And you see this like dynamic at play. So what is your take on that? And how do you? Because I know it seems like you work a lot with women who help you to understand men. I'm sure you have men that as well. What's your take on that? And kind of like from your perspective as a coach?
So what I'm about to say is not very popular, but I've observed that the vast majority of human beings, and I even want to go as far as characterizing it to saying it's probably in excess of 80% of human beings have weak emotional maturity and weak relationship skills. Now, when I talk about emotional maturity, I'm talking about whether it's regulating one's emotions, but more so, we hear at least in the United States, we have propaganda that almost inflates victim consciousness, to just name a few. Okay. In addition, we have a population who is deeply emotionally wounded, and so the way so many human beings go out to heal themselves is they think a relationship will heal them. They go seek the relationship of another to either satisfy a sexual urge. And now that sex is basically free, I mean, there's almost no consequence to having sex with someone. Fulfilling the basic needs, deeply wounded human beings, we have an incredibly dysfunctional dating marketplace. And because of that, and I don't want to go back to, to some degree, I think part of the problem is casual relationships, situationships, friends with benefits, and hookups probably replaces the dominant percentage of relationships out there because of easy sex. So when a person isn't genuine and oftentimes unconscious to themselves that they're being disingenuous, is that when they're going out in the dating environment, seeking their own needs being met, whether you're a man or a woman, okay? There's going to be a lot of wounded bodies, emotionally wounded bodies. And then this perpetuates, we have, multiple people who have had multiple relationships that have led nowhere or led to some pain or hurt. We have a huge population of truly hurting people out there. And let's not forget the existing married population. A significant, by the way, just because you're married is not a guarantee. By the way, most couples are unhappily married if they're still married, because we have, with the divorce rate, 50%, what's left over is half of those people are probably unhappy anyway. And a big part of that is because they're not loving themselves And because they don't love themselves, they either accept, narcissistic controlling type of behavior. They become doormats, or because they weren't loved as children, they become narcissist and controlling types of individuals, because we have a population of truly hurting people who are hurting on the inside, and they're looking for external type of healing. That's what I did. That's what my whole story was based on, seeking outside validation through the dating environment while I was in pain. I just happened to get lucky and healed in the process. Mm-hmm. Most people, and coming back to allowing, I want to bring that back up. The word allowing is an intentional word. In other words, you have to do something intentional. Mm-hmm. Healing requires intentionality. And it can't be, I just went to 1 week seminar and all of a sudden I'm healed. This is constant work of doing. And again, in my book, I promote personal development, self-help, and spiritual work as the pathway to, or as a vaccination to inner suffering. So bringing it back to the dating conversation, it's almost depressing to say what I just said, but here's where the hope lies. For those individuals that do the work, you put the odds in your favor of having what I always say on my channel, a juicy, delicious, healthy, happy relationship. Mm-hmm. And I say juicy only in the context I love biting into fruit and it drips down my face because it's that good. That's the relationship I want everyone to have. For those that do the work, they have a greater chance for success.
Totally agree.
Kind of like contemporary Ray and his partner.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think here's a question. It's just something I've noticed too, is like there's been a lot that has changed in society over the past half century, 75 years. Went from a very, industrial age, masculine kind of led hierarchical thing that was powerful and very electric and productive, but also lacked empathy and marginalized. People felt marginalized by it. So you have kind of a pushback on that. The pendulum swings the other direction with like the post-modernist movement, the kind of the hippies and all that, where you're like free love and fuck all this like hierarchy shit. And, you're the one, you guys have no compassion and you're creating war. And so war becomes blanket evil, and there's pendulum swings that way. And I think, and so you get kind of now a move towards like the feminine being like the answer. And then it's interesting how you see like women and like feminist movement ends up picking more masculine traits, which is really, you realize what everyone's looking for is a sense of power and controlling themselves. And there's different ways to wield that power. And, what I think is the question here is like, what would your advice, like if you're someone, like some people think the solution now is, well, we need to, kind of go backwards. We need to go back to when it was like this. And others are like, no, it's, head in the right direction. Like what, is there a middle ground? Do we need to go back and like, nope, go back to your grandfather's religion, get married and because that's the answer? Or, is there some other answer, or is that the? And I'm presenting this as kind of a little mental experiment.
Sure.
Or how does one? What I'm going to get at is how does one arrive at that self-love, and also develop the skill? Because you can't just. It's like what I think people. The reason you don't. My theory is the reason you don't feel powerful is because you just don't actually know how. You haven't received that answer. And to be able to receive that answer, you have to let go of your anger. You have to let go of the story that you're telling yourself about why you're limited so that your mind will open up to receive that potential skill. So what is your take on that? What would be like the skill? What would you tell someone today? What do you tell your students when they want to know, well, how do I approach this dating world today when it is so fucked up?
So I want to go back and address the those that seem to want to go back to something traditional. And I hear this, I hear it from both men and women, but I really want to address this because the genie's already out of the the bottle. And that is a woman's right to make her own choices and not be dependent upon men. You know, literally for 200,000 years, okay? Like, I mean, if we want to go back in time to cave people, predominantly women have had no power in their life. It's always been predicated on men. And to that extent, you know, it's awesome that women have to make choices based on a man's choice. A lot of people want to go back to an olden times. It's great for the men because women had no voice. They had no voice. Men could freely sleep with other women in a monogamous, avowed monogamous relationship, and it was quite, you know, acceptable. Okay, and sure, a lot of women on the flip side like to be taken care of and controlled because they don't have to make any choices, but they have to. But there is a big consequence for giving your power to a man. If he wants to dump, by the way, in olden times when the wealthy man wanted to dump the woman, she was left with nothing. And to some degree, we have laws in place to maybe combat that, but that's not always the case. So that woman who wants to be taken care of, wants to go back to an olden time taken care of, she's taking a risk, you know? So I'm a big proponent for women's empowerment, not from the feminist perspective, because I know there could be a lean towards hatred of men, and that's not what I'm an advocate for. And to the extent that I'm an advocate for treating everybody as a decent human being, whether you're a man or a woman, or what you identify with, I just believe in decency. Not equality per se, but I just believe treating everybody fairly and equally and that sort of thing, you know, commensurate when I say that. So from a dating perspective, sure, it's incredibly attractive from a woman's perspective that the man takes charge and he plans the date and he pays for the date, you know, and it sounds really attractive, you know, in the beginning. But just remember, there's a lot of controlling men that will take charge and do all that, but they want to be in charge and control, and you might be paying a gigantic price for that. The problem with giving the man that job is you're giving your power away to a man, because it should be, in my mind, a collaborative experience. A collaborative experience. So I believe in a co-creative experience where it's almost like what I advocate on, particularly on my YouTube channel, is kind of like when two attorneys, let's say there's a male and a female attorney, and they decide they're going to start a partnership. They each have 50-50 equity in the business. And they take, you know, they recognize maybe one person is good at admin and the other person is good in bringing in leads. So they leverage each other's strength, but they each have a say. They usually have once a week meetings to discuss the state of the partnership. And they talk about growth, and like there's a consciousness to this relationship. Well, that's what I'm encouraging my audience, is to look at it from a like a co-creative collaborative perspective, and not that the man is the leader. And I'm not advocating the woman's leader. I think you both should be in charge of your relationship destiny. I think, you know, traditionally, because women have been so conditioned to give that power away, you know, we think about it. Men do the asking of marriage, and oftentimes women takes on the man's last name. I'm almost here to say that's an archaic approach. I know it goes against all traditional norms and it goes against a lot of people's desires. But look at how fucked up our relationship system is. It's only getting worse. It's not getting any better. It might have been better years ago when survival was the dominant need, was just to get, you know, to live. Thankfully, in our first time, we don't have to worry so much about war here in the United States. And, you know, to some extent, most people have the financial resources to take care of themselves, women in particular. So I wish we'd throw out the gender rhetoric altogether and say, how can we work as a team? Anyways, that was my little bit pontificating your question.
No, this is perfect. What I'm hearing and is that relationships are not supposed to be a power struggle where it's a win-lose situation, and that's what a lot of them end up being. You get the codependency, and
especially the one up, one down type relationships.
Yes,
where women are expected to submit to a man.
So how I've seen that show up in my life in any relationship, a friendship, business partnership, whatever, and work well. And this is the beauty in this, is like, to me, I've had, my relationships with women, and I still am friends with all my exes. They're not really an ex. They're really never an ex. We spent time together, and there was some purpose. There was some alchemy that happened in that relationship, and I can see specifically where I grew and they grew, and so I have a feeling of gratitude towards it. I'm not hurt or feeling like it was a waste of time. So in that sense, stepping away from the confines of like marriage, like, doesn't make sense to me to like go run to marriage as a solution. That needs to show itself to me as making sense, assuming I have a relationship that makes sense to have, right? It's not a solution in and of itself. And to me, what relationship is like I love the word you said, collaborative. But what you collaborate on is what is the shared vision that I can say as a man I want, and you can say as a woman that I feel good about. And I want you to feel good about it. And if I'm heading in a direction that you're not headed, it's my duty to let you know that. And if that doesn't feel good to you, then you're free to go. I'm not going to force you.
By the way, but it's both people doing it. It's not the man's vision. I'm not an advocate for that. I'm an advocate of a shared vision, but you're always checking in with each other on a regular basis for that. Okay. I want to be clear
I get that. So maybe reframe it slightly. What I mean is the masculine energy in the relationship, which can come from both a man or a woman, because this energy is that intention of like, what are we going to create? And it depends on your relationship dynamics. Like Can
I jump in? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I don't like the characterization of masculine energy, mainly because it's always associated with a penis. Even though we can say a woman could have masculine energy, it's constantly associated with men. The word masculine is almost always associated with men, and feminine is almost always associated. And we can even say that energy isn't, but it's just traditionally associated with that. I like to throw out the term masculine and feminine energy and just say, as a human being, we're think of the words, but throw out the gender association with the word. Just think of the words you need to express and just without the gender association. That's all.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. By the way, I'm not asking you to change the way you are. I'm saying this to an audience because I think it's
semantics,
important. No, I think it's really critically important because, and even my friend Dr. Ray and I will argue this because I know he's a big proponent of masculine and feminine energy. I want to take those words out because it's so associated with gender. And let's just focus on what is the energy we're talking about. Intentional, both men and women. Being collaborative, both men and women. Being receivers, both men and women. Being givers, both men and women. And if we threw out the gender narrative, we'd find we're so much closer alike and we want the same things. It's the gender conversation that's kind of muddying up the waters, in my opinion. But we just started a whole nother conversation for a whole nother broadcast. Or at least I did. Anyway.
Right at the top of the hour there. Well,
maybe that would be a part two. That should be a part.
Well, hey, it's your fault. You set it up. Well, I might have to get you for another one. We're gonna have the gender debate.
I'm game.
There you go. We'll do that.
Okay. So stick around for.
I'd love to hash that out. I'm the kind of person I love to see different perspectives. I'm a big believer if you overlay them, that something will emerge out of that is going to be a little bit transcendent of it. Because usually what we're lost in is communication and understanding. It's usually something surface, and underneath it, we're like, we get okay. Now we're coming from. Very cool. Well. I want, I know we're at the top of the hour here and you got some coaching to do. You got a busy day ahead of you. I did want to ask you though, if you could just give me my audience like a quick introduction. Like if someone wanted to get involved with you or learn more,
sure.
Maybe they're in their middle age or they're wanting to kind of navigate this crazy dating world, then how might they go about doing that with you? What would be the best way?
Okay, sure. It's funny. I was doing this with my finger. You can see you can see my name listed here and how it's spelled, Jonathon Aslay. And I'm sure Eric will post this as well. The best place to get connected with me is through my YouTube channel. I am very blessed that I have a pretty good subscribership now. I got one of those silver plaques in the corner over there. And it shares my perspective and my opinions on dating, mating, or relating. But you can always go to my website. You can go to Instagram or Facebook and find me on social media. But mostly, I encourage everyone to go to my YouTube channel. Listen to what I have to say. If it resonates with you, great. Then share it with friends. If it doesn't, that's okay too. I'm actually, right as we speak, Eric, I'm beginning a channel for men. Most of my videos are curated for women, but I'm starting a channel for men. It'll be listed
awesome
right on my channel. So because I believe that, I think humans are thirsty for genuine, real connection. They just don't know how to go about doing it. And that's the conversations I like to have.
Very cool. Okay, cool. Well, what I'll do is I'll post a link right here, and then I'll also put them in the description for you.
Okay.
So you can go check Jonathon out. So awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm definitely going to take you up on that part 2 if you're down for that, and we can get into the masculine.
I think that's great. I love debating masculine and feminine energy. So.
Well, with that, guys, if you have any questions or comments, then go ahead and drop those in the comments below. And if you have any questions for Jonathon, you can put them there as well for our next debate / conversation. And
I promise to read them all, okay?
And I appreciate you guys tuning in. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and that thumbs up. That really helps other people to find this content as well. And with that, I'm going to let you go, Jonathon, and just say once again, thank you for being on the show, brother.
Hey, thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.